Okay, planned stage meeting, 11th of the 11th, 2020. Alex, you have the first item.
Okay, hi all. Hopefully it works though. Let's see. Actually, let me stop just in case. So I'll be sharing my screen. Can you see two browsers?
Yep.
Okay, so I'll try to show the. So here on the left, the browser is basically, I think yesterday's master or something like that. So I want to show that what we currently have and what this change kind of brings. And what I'll do, so let's go from the first. At the instance level, we do have templates, and I've not selected, but yeah, we have a project here, a repository here selected as a instance template. Now, what this actually does right now in production is this sets these templates for file templates. So in GitLab, we have two concepts of file templates and description templates. Description templates are for issues and merge requests, and file templates are for all sorts of other files that I'll go through in a moment. So let's say we have a couple groups here with some hierarchy, and I'll go straight into a deeper level just to show how these file templates, well, let's say we go here. So when you add a file, you have this selected type of template, or if it is Docker file, then you have all of these types of templates from different levels listed here. There is a bug here that somehow it doesn't really differentiate between the content of the two files, but that's fixable, I guess. Anyway, the structure is here. Now, what we have instead, for instance, for an issue, is we only have templates from within this specific project to use. So if you are in a project that defines the issue template, then you can use them here. But if you go to a project within the same group without templates, although for the file templates, you do have those inherited, right? For the issues, you kind of miss that completely. They just don't have the option, just because this specific project within its repo doesn't have the description templates specified. And just to make it clear, for the templates, for the file templates, you just go to the specific group and pick from which project you want the templates to be pulled. So you can specify this. I do have two types of groups, like not inheriting, the groups that do not inherit from each other, and I have them another set of groups that do inherit, which means you don't have to specify this, they'll just inherit from their parent. So now if we go to the changes that I've done, I've kind of replicated the same behavior, but now for the issues templates. So if I do a new issue, then you have all of the same templates that are being inherited from one group to another. Now there is a UI problem here. If you have them deeper and deeper and deeper, then this will go just longer and longer. I don't know how best to approach this and to solve it, and this doesn't have the bug where you don't, like, they'll just return the right template if you want to use this one. So yeah, that's the demo pretty much. if you have any questions.
Yeah, so in the drop down, I think you said it was a bug maybe that you were showing the same templates lots of times. Like you only have to find 2 templates in one project, right? Like description templates?
For the description, yes, but the bug is not for the description template, but for the file template.
Okay, so in the drop down, if we only have basically two, there's another issue template. So we're showing like a duplicate template from that is inherited from each parent group, but
No,
it's
we're
still
not showing a duplicate. So this parent group has a different project assigned to it as a template repository. So
okay. That's what I was confused about. Is just the
yeah. So I have another example. Let me just do that real fast. Where I don't inherit this stuff is like where it doesn't override stuff. So here I have this subgroup, and if I go to general templates, yeah, this is just inherits the instance template. So what will happen here in the project, it will only show it will only show instance templates and the templates from the project itself.
okay. All right.
So if I guess I would need to create yet another subgroup to prove that that's the case here. Subgroup, create, and then a new project. Create. So I didn't specify any kind of template repository for this subgroup, right? And now if I do a new issue, it will just inherit the instance one. So instance ones are pretty much always, well, it's pushed down from the instance. If you remove the instance template, then you'll have nothing here as well.
Got it. Okay.
So yeah, I tried to make it somewhat on parity with the file templates, because although we think of them kind of differently, they're the same thing. You still store them, like all of them, in a project repository. The structure is slightly different, like for Docker and for other things, you need to have this structure, whereas for description templates, you need them to be in .GitLab, and then issue templates, merge request templates, and we can add epic templates and whatever we want to add here as well. Maybe we can somehow fix this structure to be more coherent, so you don't have some stuff in .GitLab and some stuff in the root directory and so on. But yeah, at least this is one step closer to having like a single place where you can define all of your templates and then just reuse them as you wish at different group levels and so on.
Yeah, that's this is an awesome next iteration on templates. So I think it'll be valuable. I know like this is one of the most upvoted issues in our stage is group level issue templates and epic templates and MR templates. So.
Yeah, because right now you cannot, even if you, like you need in each and every project, you need to define the specific template for the issue and merge request if you want to have something like that. You cannot reuse something from a different project at this moment. So who's next? I think it's you, John. If there are no questions.
Yeah, like just an observation, like just because Eugenia and I were talking about this in relation to page titles, and it would be nice for it to be standard. Yeah, so just for the side scrolling bug, yeah, we're going to go with this kind of group and then ellipsis and then the subgroup in the project where the ellipsis just covers all the subgroups in between. And I think we already use this for page titles. to compress page titles. And I think it has all the information you need in most cases. Like it tells you what the top level group is, it tells you what subgroup you're working at and what project you're in. So I don't know if that's helpful. I asked Eugenia as well to see if she knows which helper actually produces that, because it would be nice to have a single source of truth. Eugenia, you want to verbalize that?
Yes, the one I know is called full name. I'm just not sure how it behaves with the subgroups. I think it will, because that's what we're using for the title. But the title of a page, for example, is showing a project. But I'm not sure. I probably have to go and see the method or a page that is using it. I guess it will make sense that it has the subgroups and.
Cool. Cool. Well, we can follow up async. Cool. Nice work. Any more input on that before we move on?
Thanks for the demo, Alex. That was great.
Seconded. Really good. Cool. So I have opened an issue already to discuss documentation updates around the rollout of a feature flag, but it just so happens that this morning we had some feedback from Marcel on the documentation or lack thereof for quality management. We lifted the feature flag on this yesterday for .com, so it's available to everyone who uses .com, but we haven't defaulted the feature flag to on. And there does appear to be some conflicting guidance around how we should manage documentation when there's a feature flag used in this way. So I'm kind of asking everyone for discussion on the issue, although I do just want to take action on it as quickly as possible and merge whatever improvements we need. If you're like, if you can imagine how this happened, like we basically have two not great possibilities. One is that we document a feature before the feature flag is ready to be switched on .com, and then we have documentation and no feature, or the opposite, where we turn it on for .com without having written the documentation, and we periodically, like for a short period of time, have no documentation for a feature that's live on .com. That's the situation we're in now with quality management. So one possible solution is that we would have like a draft MR ready to merge when we just before we flip on the feature flag, something like that. But I'm looking for more input, more ideas, because that's still not great. So Alex, you have the first response.
Yeah, I was just thinking if we want to force it, maybe we can just add these checks to some sort of a pipeline and hard fail the MR. So we would not be able to merge it unless it has documentation or unless it has an approval from a technical writer that this is okay to be merged without documentation and so on and so forth. So yeah, that's my thinking right now. Like if we want to enforce that, that will obviously add to the time that the MR will make to the production, because there are multiple parties now involved in doing that. But like you need to compromise either one. Everything with documentation merged in takes a little more time, or sometimes merge something without documentation. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's as well, like the guidance sort of, well, any MR that has the documentation label, I believe, is supposed to be reviewed by a technical writer, and it's possible we've missed that once or twice, just going by the feedback from Martin in the retrospectives. I think the last one was from 13.4. He left a pretty detailed comment on that. The other thing is like that some of the feature flag guidance says that we should, if we're using a feature flag, include the documentation when we default the feature flag to on. But if we're following the rollout guidance for a feature flag, that would be too late, because the feature flag would already be switched on for .com. Customers would already be able to use the feature, and it would be undocumented in that state. So basically, like I'm agreeing that like I think it would slow it down, but I think it's kind of necessary to have it as part of the review process of at least one of those two MRs, either the one that includes the feature or the one that switches it on by default. Yeah, but the guidance is kind of contradictory. And then also, like, how would we know, right? How would we know the right token?
But did you just say that even the flag is not on by default? It was enabled for some specific project. We are kind of lacking documentation at this step, which is where the conflict comes from. Is that correct?
So the quality management feature is quite unique in that way, in that we switched it on for specific customers with no documentation, but we switched it on at their request with knowing that it was a beta feature, and we were quite happy to do that because it gives us early feedback. Question is, when it's switched on for .com, how do we ensure the documentation's right?
See, the problem with this is, please. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It feels the problem is not in not having documentation, but in the ways that we enable the feature flags, which I think we had a discussion some time before as well. Like, we keep enabling these features per customer requests or for some, and we don't have a place where we want to test them without like the rest of the world sort of seeing them. So maybe .com only is the way where you would enable a not enabled by default feature flag and test it and figure out that it doesn't have documentation and other stuff, and then enable it for customers. We keep doing like this feature flag enable, and then we need to juggle with multiple groups or workplaces where some specific feature does not work, so we need to turn off the feature flag for specific customers and so on and so on.
Yeah, this is where I really struggle with brand new features. It's less of an issue for established features where we're adding things on and the documentation may be slightly wrong for those. The problem with like an MVC is, from my understanding of the feature flag rollout process, you want to turn it on and get feedback for it. So if we add it to the documentation now and turn it on for .com, that's great. But then some people aren't going to be able to see that. So you want to turn it on without enabling it to default to on first. And we can't currently do that. So as soon as we're like, oh yeah, we'll turn it on for .com, give it a few days, make sure it doesn't break anything dramatically, and then we'll enable it by default. If we merge the documentation when we enable it for .com, then we have to turn it back off. Then we're just going to get complaints that this is in the docs and isn't in the product. So it doesn't take into account the fact that we use feature flags to verify it's working. So I think we just have to come to an understanding that there may be a week where there's either a feature enabled and no documentation, or documentation and no feature. I think there's no way around that, because we can't keep pulling it back out of the documentation if we were to have to disable the feature flag. Once it's enabled by default, I completely agree that documentation needs to be present. But in this test period, it seems to me like we're just going to have to accept the fact that there may be a misalignment occasionally. But again, maybe I'm simplifying it too much.
I don't know whose brilliant idea it was that was working on iterations. It wasn't mine. But one of the things that we did do that I thought was really useful, especially when we were working with some customers who want to be early adopters, I think the first piece of documentation we put was the feature flag documentation. So I linked to it, but it basically says like, this is disabled by default, right? And here's a feature flag if you want to enable it. And then as we added new things to the feature itself, we would like add the documentation, but like that gets it a placeholder in the documentation itself, so that people, like, if they're not sure what it is, can go there and be like, oh, this thing is disabled by default because it's still like in alpha or whatever you want to call it in the documentation. And then like it's there, and you can kind of, it's more additive, if that makes sense. And you don't have to wait for like a big rollout. So it's almost like the first time you create the feature flag for the feature, create the documentation with the blurb about the feature flag. And that way it's there, at least, is something that then people can iteratively add on to. So I feel like if it's not there, sort of like what you said, Mark, then it's almost like, when do you add it? Where do you put it? What should it say? And then it becomes like this sort of insurmountable thing that feels harder to iterate on, because you have to like write a whole bunch of stuff before you can make something go live, instead of just like little bits as with each merge request. That's my...
No, Gabe, I really like that. I think that highlights an opportunity here. Is we could go back to the idea that all code MRs that enable a feature should have documentation on them. It's just when we merge that code, even if it's behind a feature flag, we then have the documentation in that MR, like we were supposed to from the get-go in theory. And we just say in the documentation, this is currently behind a feature flag, but we have all the documentation there. That way, when we enable it, the feature flag MR that enables it to default to on, that's the MR where we rev the documentation and take out the little blurb that says this is behind a feature flag. Maybe that will make people more happy because then it's there and they're like, hey, I'm seeing this. Well, it's behind a feature flag that must be enabled right now. But at least it gives them documentation, but then people aren't expecting it. If they see it, it's there. If but they're not expecting it to be there, I don't know. We can talk more on it. I know you opened up an issue for it, so I appreciate that. But yeah, I feel like there's got to be in between time when we launch a new thing like an MVC or something like quality management. There's going to be this uncomfortable growth period where we're like rolling it out, and I think we just need to take into account that.
So I'm not sure if there was a change in this documentation process recently, but we used to merge the documentation with the fact.
Is it just me or?
No,
the
yeah.
page, which was, oh, sorry, my
Sorry,
network.
Jan, could you try that again? If you wouldn't mind, go around again from the start.
Was to merge a code with documentation since beginning and just point out in documentation that it's behind feature flag. And my understanding is that the documentation still says this. And the moment you enable this on .com, even if it's still behind the feature flag, you are supposed to have a documentation on place. So I would expect that nothing changes here. Maybe it's just the wrong wording in the documentation page. But I would expect that documentation is still there from the beginning, and it's stated that it's behind the feature flag.
So, John, is it possible for us to get Kashal to go ahead and merge the documentation update ahead of enabling the feature flag by default and just have it on, and recognizing that we might have missed this one a little bit and just go ahead and do it, and then we'll in the future have a better system? It sounds like we're working toward a better system. I don't know if that would make people happier. I just don't want to get under a lot of scrutiny for this when we have a solution that we're looking to implement. I don't want everybody to be like, oh, now we have to document our solution, present our solution. I'd rather just avoid that whole mess and say, hey, this didn't go quite as well as it could have. Let's just ask for amends. Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Like, so that's why I'm looking to just take an action on this as soon as possible, move on with our lives. I think like it would be worse to switch off quality management at this stage and then document it and then switch it back on. Like, we just have to learn from it and kind of figure out what went wrong. Honestly, when we get feedback once that something's wrong, that's fair enough. We can adjust course, but this is 2 or 3 times now that documentation around feature flags has come up as a problem. So it's just at that point where we have to fix something. But yeah, like you said, I don't recommend switching off quality management. We just kind of make sure we learn for next time. And to your question, I'm not sure where the docs are at with quality management, but from the feedback from Kushal, they're pretty much ready to go, I believe. Cool. So I have the next item as well. It's just a short one. I'm sort of still working on I'm definitely still working on our Q4 backend OKR. So I'm taking sort of last minute ideas on it. All I've got at the minute is that we have now an LCP leaderboard for, I guess, routes of interest in GitLab. That has quite a few product planning and general plan routes that are problematic. One approach to the OKR is that we just have a goal of bringing a certain number of these back into the green. Like that means less than 2.5 seconds for largest content full paint render. I don't know, I can't say that. That's still quite ambitious, like, because we have a few of these routes are actually in the red, like, so they're taking close to 10 seconds. So, and it could also be something we could collaborate on the back end with front end on. Jan's also working on tooling improvements, so that fits in nicely. That could be another key result as well. And yeah, I mean, it's not an area of focus at the minute, but transient bugs are an area of focus, and you could consider some of these transient bugs. There are parts of the site that just kind of feel bad to use. An example is the filter bar. If you've gone looking for the first time you enter a label into the filter bar and you have to wait 4 or 5 seconds to see the list of labels, and then you have to retype whatever filter you were already typing. Or you like, a classic one for me is I'm looking for everything that's back-end labeled, so I type back-end without the D and wait for the response to fill, and then I type the D so it does the final sort. It's stuff like that that just doesn't feel great. So if we could maybe pick out some back-end requests that people use on a daily basis, or even look at like user journeys through GitLab and tune those up, I think that would be a good fast follow for this OKR. I think probably for this one, we want to focus just on those routes that are of most interest in the leaderboard. So anyway, if you have any ideas, want to make any contributions to the OKR itself, please let me know. If you have ideas as a PM, how things like this can be scheduled while also keeping up with our normal feature deliverables, please let me know about that as well.
One of the routes that's really bad, that's under our purview, is the boards, like project management boards, and it's mostly slow because of issue lists. They take a long, like the actual issue list ends up being the largest contentful paint, and it takes, some of them take 4 to 5 seconds. Given that we're currently kind of in the middle of a refactor on boards, I don't know if anyone on this call has like any insight on whether or not we'll be that will be like likely to improve or change drastically based on that refactor. I'm like hesitant to like focus on sort of like improving the speed of that route, given that we are kind of in the middle of the refactor for it. But I'm curious, like if it's actually gonna end up being worse, and then we'll have to go back and visit through. So I don't know if there's any insight to be had there, or if anyone knows, but I would like to get that one. It's like the third slowest route out of all of these, so I would like to get it improved.
I'll let the engineer speak, but I was playing around with it a little bit and yesterday and with swim lanes and stuff. And I think what we were doing before the swim lanes was making a request for each list, separate one. I think we're doing the same thing with GraphQL now in swim lanes. So I don't know if we really changed how we approach building up the board. But this is also the sort of the thing where I wonder if things like adding an OR operator would make it a little bit more performant. So instead of making 10 requests, we can make one request that has like basically an OR operator in the filter. Say like the issues with these different labels, basically, instead of a singular request for each. I don't know though. It's like, it's a super hairy problem when you really start thinking about how you have to build the board up to get the view you want. So I don't know. I would defer to Jan and Charlie and Flory and the folks that have been working on it.
Yeah, I think just given the maturity of the internal API, we're unlikely to see any performance benefit, in my opinion, from moving to GraphQL. What would be interesting from my point of view would be like things that are going to have, I mean, serious improvements on performance, like caching. You know, okay, the first load of the issue board, like if there are 10 views of the issue board for every one edit of the issue board, then that's a candidate for some serious caching. The problem is always with us is what I see on the issue board the same as what you see? Because if it isn't, like if I have some entitlements to see confidential security issues, then it's not as easily cacheable, right?
What if we, and I was, a long time ago, I built a couple of front ends where I would basically store everything in the client, on client-side database in IndexedDB, I think, and I use service workers to update things asynchronously in the background via WebSockets. So like for all of the, whatever the database size was, basically, I basically stored a rolling inventory of all of the things. And when any of those things changed, I got the change pushed over WebSockets. So that way, like I never had to load a bunch of stuff every time I went to server, and you basically can validate that your client side database is right. And if it's not, then you basically purge it and then you resync stuff in, which takes a little bit longer. But that basically made it so that the first load took a little while, but everything after that was fine, unless there was a problem, which you basically catch the error and then purged the state and then reloaded the state, and it was fine. So that could be an interesting like approach, being a little bit more front end heavy too.
There's also some magic we could do if I mean, this is a little bit trickier and more front end heavy, but if we had what's in view load, I think right now we just load like the last issue list first, which is usually off the page in terms of the browser. Like it's usually, you know, scrolled over to the right, and then we don't make any sort of prioritization decision on what we're loading based on if it's visible or not. So if we loaded the ones that are in the viewport first, versus the ones that are not visible, but I don't know if, you know, one, I don't know if that actually helps the largest contentful paint at all. Not that it's about that. We should be working to improve the metrics, or improve the performance, but you know, there's maybe something there too in terms of prioritizing the loading of those issue lists.
The big problem with issue boards is that it's really just a virtual wrapper, because it just defines a filter on issues, and just running any queries on list of issues on .com with set of labels will be
what? Cliffhanger.
it,
We kind of lost you, Jan. You sort of cut out there, so I don't know if you can hear us.
yeah, sorry, my internet connection is wrong. I will write it into spreadsheet instead. Sorry, document instead.
Cool. So do we want to talk a bit more about issue boards or take it offline?
We should create a issue to track it, I would think, or just have an async discussion about it. I also linked in the seminar that Alex Pulley and Mange was working on. It's basically like, I don't know if it would be applicable here, but specifically like the group board where you have to sort of like pull things through a bunch of different subgroups and projects and that sort of thing. Like he was working on this idea of doing a traversal, basically queries by traversing instead of like recursing. And some of the early benchmarks that they were running in the MR was showing like 6 times faster than the current method that they were doing it. So this could be one thing that helps speed up, like where you have to pull a lot of objects or issues or epics, whatever, from a lot of different children. I don't know if it would or not, but I just passed it along in case it would.
Yeah, that will probably be helpful for the epics as well. We have the iris kind of stuff there, so we can sort of store the paths to the, like between the child and the parent epic, maybe in terms of a ID is separated by something or some sort. So yeah, that probably can help on the epics tree sort of thing. But back onto the board, and I don't know from top of my head, in the issue list, do we have a limit on the issues that we load per list? Maybe we can add some sort of a pagination to that, and you'd load more issues on scroll or something like that. I don't know how that hurts UX or something like that, because it does seem like from the times, it does seem that we do load everything that we have in a list, in an issue list, and that hurts as well. So maybe we can add a limited number of issues, the first 50, I don't know, for each list, and then go from there.
It seems like also it's a really good candidate for Russian doll caching. I'm not sure if Russian doll caching is still considered acceptable. Like, but back in the day, it was the big thing. And like, because you have like a parent board and then all the issues, if I move one issue from a list to another, I just bust the cache for those two lists. I don't bust the cache for the whole board. The problem is like there are so many ways that you could bust the cache for an issue. You know, you can do it from the issue itself. You can do it from an epic by simply moving it in night. So you know, you can kind of change this in so many places. It becomes really difficult to manage the cache. Just yeah, and you want to try and go around again on your feedback.
Probably not, because my connection will drop soon. Yeah, just a thought that the biggest problem is filtering by a complex set of labels and other filters we define on issue, because the between what issues are. Never mind. It's not possible.
Yeah, okay, we can do this async. Cool. That's our last item, unless anyone has anything else. Cool. Okay. Gabe, you want to verbalize that?
Oh, sure. I think Jan was suggesting like a tighter connection between issue boards and issues. This has always been the thing that I found the hardest about how we have like iterated on boards, and to the point where you can have as many project boards, as many issue or group level boards as you want, and there's no like direct correlation to like an issue in a board. So like if you wanted to set, I was thinking about this for things like automations and rules, where like other products will have automations that you configure on the board itself to take on issues, but you can't do that in our product because it would impact all the issues across all the boards, right? And so like there's this like weird thing where we made it so flexible that we've also made it difficult to like from a performance standpoint, but also to like have a tighter relationship between issues and boards. So if there is a way, if anyone can think of a way to like basically get to the point where you can have one board project or group, that would be awesome. But I know that that's never going to happen. So yeah, I'm open to changing how things work from the product standpoint for if it like leads to performance gains. And I think that's where we really, as we move forward, building new things and iterating on things, it like always let's have that conversation about trade-offs and what can we not do because it will be not as performant versus like if we take this other approach that kind of gets us 90% of the way there, that's 100% more performant, like that's a win. And so I'm very open as a product manager to doing some of those like trade-off discussions with the engineers instead of just saying, hey, go build this and then not taking your wisdom into consideration. So that's what I wanted to verbalize.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder like if the concept of having like a locked board would also work. Like, so once you're done editing the filters and the milestones, you lock the board and it's no longer editable. And in that sense, as issues move through, you can have historical data. Like I'm used to something like Redmine, which is extremely simple, where you have a board. I also have a burn down chart associated with that board. Right. So I know that this board is scoped to a certain number of things, and that when I see that burn down chart, it's historically accurate and visually, like I can associate the two. And whereas you can't do that with our boards because like I could just go in there today and change the milestone, you know, and now everything's like on that board has changed. The context completely changed.
Yep. We have to figure out how to put analytics in boards, burn down and burn up charts and cumulative flow diagrams and all these other things. So like that's one of the requirements from some of the analysts that we're doing a demo for in January, I believe. We're supposed to have analytics on the boards by then, which I don't know how that's going to work. But yeah, I agree with you. It's a huge challenge to solve. And if it's locking boards or if it's saving another thing that we talked about was like saved filters on boards. So you can like switch between different views, but if you save the filter, it's sort of like locking it to a certain degree, because you can then build your data up against that save filter. So that could be another approach too.
Why don't we have a board that's scoped to a milestone? Like when you create a milestone, it automatically has a board so that I can go and look at that board and I can filter it any way I want. It's the same as with iterations, right? If I go to the iterations view now, like I can see a list of all the issues that are in that iteration, but it's every issue at GitLab and every group that's using that iteration at the minute. Whereas if I just had a board scoped to that iteration, I could go in and see, and then I can filter it. Like I'm interested in product planning or wider plan things. Somebody else is interested in verify. It's really just an issue board as we have them now, but it's locked to that milestone.
That would work for the use case where you are in a single, you're like working inside of the time box, but it doesn't work when you need to plan across many time boxes. So if I have 4 iterations coming up and I have an epic that has 20 issues in it, and I want to sequence it across 4 upcoming iterations, then we would have to have a different way to solve for that, right? Which would be a little bit more flexible. But I have thought about the idea of like more formatted boards, if that makes sense, where you basically pick the use case you want to use the board for, and that's like it, right? And then you can like switch between your different use case boards instead of like making it 100% configurable. I think that's where like we could always support the freeform boards, but then as we identify these use cases where it does make sense and it does improve performance, to like have these sort of special case boards that only do certain things. And then switching back between the different things easily is like I've been talking to Alexis and Holly about that too. It's just we've been thinking about boards, so that's not a bad idea.
Cool. We're way off topic.
I'm just like what you're mentioning is like improving the user experience on using boards, it seems, but I don't see how that solves for the performance, because if a board needs to display a million issues, it'll still be performing poorly, right? You cannot, there is no other way around it, because like you can configure a board, make it locked on the filters or whatever, but if you keep adding issues that need to pop up on the board, it'll just be slow.
Yeah, it might open some options up though. Like if we did go with some kind of caching option down the line, I can simply bust the entire cache by changing one of the filters on the board and we're back to square one. But if the filter is locked to say milestone, that at least takes some of the query away.
But if you change the milestone on a different issue, you're still going to pull those issues as well. So you cannot cache the issues themselves. You're just caching the filter, which is not the biggest problem here, as far as I understand. So yeah, they're like the only way I can think right now is just logged in smaller chunks. But yeah, but like the other way, the other thing is the thing that someone mentioned about making the relationship between the board and the issues somewhat hard linked. So what that would mean is that every issue that needs to be displayed on the board will have a relationship kind of in the table or somewhere, and that can potentially make it easier to just load those issues into the board, right? You don't have to query a huge database of labels and filters. You just know that these issues need to be on these boards. Now, how do you get to those links is a different problem. You need to have some sort of an async job where whenever you put a label on an issue, you just create that link, or vice versa, remove that link, and so on and so forth. So that might be another kind of way to make it sort of faster to load, but that moves the problem to a different
Yeah, it's actually a great idea.
The timing for the issue boards page on the Grafana, it's for loading the page, including all the lists on some default issue board. I'm curious from where, from which issue board request this measurement comes from.
The site speed measurement, the LCP measurement. I can find that. There's a repo with all the routes that we measure and the URLs. I can find that and put it in the doc.
Cool, thanks.
Cool. Looks like we're done. We're nearly at time. So let's call it there. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.
Everybody.